Okay, ladies and gents, welcome to the stream today. We got a major event that's taken place. I mean, the headlines on this are absolutely just unbelievable. They are staggering. We'll go over this in a moment. Firstly, two things before we get started on this massive event that's taken place. Firstly, in fact, let me change this over. This is the last weekend now. So this weekend, the money psychology and stock market comes off the 90% sale. So you've got until Sunday on that. So, that ends on Sunday. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say, I read all the comments as best I can. And a lot of the comments yesterday from the video about what I talked about, the Ukrainian offensive into Russia, I saw so many people were saying, Neil, you've got this wrong. The Ukrainian offensive went into Russia. It failed. All the Ukrainians were killed. All the equipment was wiped out. It was a failure. They're not holding any land mass. I saw these comments, those dozens and dozens of them. So firstly, I always double check whatever I talk about on the channel. So I always get 2 to 3 points and verify it. And I even sometimes will verify, especially if it's the Russian stuff. We've got 2 people in the Patreon who are Russian. Yes. So I always get them if I'm really stuck to verify something to translate for me. So obviously I did that with yesterday's information. So I've checked it again today with both of them, with the media sources, and everything I said yesterday, I'm not going to change anything I said. So I don't know where all that information came from, that all the Ukrainians that went in, the 2 battalions have been wiped out and it's over. But even on the Russian Ministry of Defense website, it's still saying what I talked about yesterday. So you probably just want to check all the information. I don't know where all of that came from, that offensive was unsuccessful and they were all wiped out. But that is not the case. They're still holding land. Yes, Russia is now bringing in reinforcement. There's massive battles going on. A lot of Ukrainian soldiers were killed in the fighting and everything. A lot of equipment was, but it isn't the way people have been talking about yesterday in the comments. Okay, so with that said then, because I really got to get that out there, because sometimes these things start spreading and I can't quite understand where this is coming from. And I still don't know. I Google searched, I did all sorts of searches yesterday. So if you could tell me where you got that information from, the source, if you were one of the dozens of people that left that comment or comments around that, can you please let me know the source of that? Because I couldn't find it anyway. Right, now let's get into what actually happened. This is broken over the last 24 hours then. 2.9 billion people may have had their social security numbers and other financial data compromised. And this was actually launched across about 7 or 8 media sites. And it's affected people across the USA. So it said pretty much everyone in the USA, because of your social security records, your credit history, or your searches, or your financial records. It said everyone in the USA, because of the company that does it all with the government, has been compromised. So we're going to talk about that, and there's also some steps that you can take to protect your data. So that is one thing. But it also talks about this company, how they've got this much power, I have no idea, and how they hold this many records. But it also affects the UK, it affects Canada, it affects a lot of Western countries. So this data has been appearing all over the dark web, and you can just search. There's a database, I'll show you the link to it. You can just search in that database for your records, and it's unbelievable. So I was just typing in random names and it was bringing up records. It's pretty scary actually. So you definitely want to check this for yourself. Let's go through then and talk about what has actually occurred. About 2.9 billion people. I would very much doubt that it is that many people. That is, just think how many people that is. That wouldn't just be the US, the UK, Canada, and some of the other Western countries. That would bring in a lot of other countries as well. I'm wondering how many of these are duplicate records, just so we're more accurate on the figures. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you may be personally affected by a breach, one expert says. They also, I've got some recommended steps for you as well, so you can check for your data and then how you can sort of protect yourself as best as possible. So there's now this class action lawsuit against the company, and if true, reports suggest all Americans, so everyone, if you're American, if you're British, etc., you're Western, your data has, according to this report, been breached and is out there. It says everything, all of your information. It talks about family members, shows you who your parents are, shows who your brothers and sisters are, who your children are, shows your date of birth. It shows all your addresses, where you've lived. It shows your current address, where you live. It shows what credit cards you've got, what loans you've got, who your mortgage is with. It shows pretty much everything. It's scary, ladies and gents. This is really scary, and it makes me wonder how this occurred in the first place, but especially with everything we're talking about with cyber attacks and what might be coming in the future, and why they brought all these digital ID laws in and everything. It could be some sort of a setup. That's my concern with a lot of this. So where do we get to? Yes, so it occurred not recently, but back in April, and they've only just started talking about it now. The media's only just picked up on it. This has been kept very hush-hush. This was the National Public Data owned by Jericho Pictures. It failed to properly safeguard information it had scraped. If this turns out to be accurate, it would just basically mean that everyone is affected. So every single person. Now, there's a number of pieces of advice. We've got one here, and I'll give you a couple from the other site here. So one piece of advice, now you've got to look into the consequences of doing this, but you can freeze your credit for the time being. And this is one of the top tips they're giving people to protect your personal records. But at the same time, you've got to bear in mind, even if there's hackers out there and they're working on it right now, all these financial frauds, everyone is affected. So you've got to be pretty unlucky for them to target you. Although if they're using any sort of AI software, they could be doing this using AI, and they could do a lot of records at once. So that's another risk here. It's also the best step if you think your data is being compromised. The process can be done quickly and for free by submitting separate requests to each of the 3 credit bureaus. So that's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Billions of records they're talking about here. Let's go on to Zero Hedge. This was US, Canada, UK. We've already talked about this. It was put up for sale for $3.5 million on the dark web. And here it is. So you can go on to Zero Hedge, if any of you use Zero Hedge, and you can go on to the article. It was on today, so you'll find it easily. It'll be on the homepage. And there's an online tool, so you can actually go on this. You can check if your information is on there. But here's a few tips that they've got so that you can reduce your risk. Freeze your credit file, so you can do this immediately. Activate 2-factor authentication for your existing accounts. To be honest, you should already have this anyway. I've got this on mine, as well as I use other things. I use keys and things like that. And you can also strengthen your passwords as well. So if you haven't changed them in a while, you could strengthen your passwords this way. But again, it's not going to completely stop someone who's doing identity fraud. Now, another story we just had out in the US is around this mass amounts of layoffs. This is just continuing. It's continuing. If you thought it was bad over the last year, especially 23, we've now got more. So Cisco as well, laying off 7% of the company's workforce very shortly. Intel, another, I guess I would call these tech companies, 15,000 employees. This is the interesting thing, they're about to receive $8.5 billion in taxpayers' money as well. Paramount Global, they're going to slash their workforce by 15%. Stellantis, another one here, they're going to slash 2,450 workers. Fastly, this 11% of their workers. Axios is going to do a load of their workers. Sonos. Honestly, you should see how many companies are doing this at the moment. 6% of its workforce here. This is telling us something is not right with the US economy. We also had this just take place as well overnight. There was chaos at the Harris New York City event as these protesters basically just stormed the restaurant. And the police chief is saying, well, we're not allowed to prosecute. We're not allowed to do anything because everything's been decriminalized. So he's basically saying it's your own fault to them, saying there's nothing we can do. We can't arrest them. We can't really do anything about it. We can remove them and we can arrest some for the criminal damage, but that's about it. The article says anti-Israel agitators hurled smoke bombs and expletives. What? Expletives. Okay, in Harlem Wednesday night after a pro-Kamala Harris campaign party. And now the other thing they're talking about is the demonstrations next week, because it's the DNC, the Democratic Convention next week. And the police are saying it's going to be absolute chaos. They said this was just a small handful. There was just like a dozen protesters that caused all this. And they said next week it's going to be tens of thousands are going to turn up. And the police are giving this warning now. They're saying, look, you see what happened with just a dozen of these, what they called rioters at this one restaurant. They said, you do not know what's coming next week. And one of the police chiefs said, soft on crime, blue city laws and policies have emboldened agitators and those looking to incite riots during protests. By not prosecuting, the cities are inviting riots to happen. I was looking over the Trump risk index as well for you today. And it was all about the global impact of a Trump presidency. Now, it's quite complex, some of this, so I'm just going to bring up a visualization in a second here. But if you want to read this, it's called the Trump Risk Index by The Economist. So you can find this again, easy search to find it. And it talks about all the risk levels for different countries. And it's actually Mexico. Believe it or not, Mexico is at the highest risk of what they call a Trump presidency and closing the doors, as it were. So becoming more local is what they're saying is going to happen. Trade, 100% risk. Security, high risk. Immigration, high risk. Germany, this is another big one. So the risk is for Germany quite heavily. Very heavy. China, not as much as you'd expect, and then a few other countries here. I'll show you an infographic. In fact, let's pull it up here. So this shows the highest exposure in trade specifically. Here, we have Mexico with the highest level, then China, then Canada. It's saying Canada's economy is going to be hit really, really hard if Trump becomes president, which I still stand by my forecast. I do think he is going to be president in November. Vietnam, Germany, big one, Japan, Taiwan, India, Ireland, and South Korea. So these are the countries that are going to be the hardest hit in terms of GDP. So something to be aware of, especially if you do business or invest into these countries. And let's have a look at what some of the summary said here. Trade policy could become more protectionistic with a focus on policies aimed at protecting jobs and industries at home. And although some of you might not think that's a good idea, actually what's happening in the US, especially with the US dollar losing somewhat of its reserve status and it's gradually declining, it's quite important. You think about what China's done and how they've grown this massive GDP. What they've done is they took a lot of the people that were living quite rurally, they moved them into the cities and they built up their upper class. So they did a lot of all these new factories and they built up all their manufacturing base as well as minerals and things. They went to Africa. They've been in Africa for a long time. So they're sort of building up all these resources as well. The US, apart from having huge amounts of energy resources, which under the current administration, they can't, well, they say they can't touch them and they say they're not going to touch them, but they actually are. US is producing more energy than ever at the moment. But this is the risk that we're seeing, is that a lot, especially the Rust Belt in the USA, if you think about how many jobs were lost, what Trump's saying is he's going to bring that back. I think it's going to be interesting to see exactly how, I've tried to see how he's going to do this, because you think about how high wages will be and how much it will cost to actually manufacture in the US versus just importing from China. It still isn't clear how exactly he's going to do that. I've tried to research it and look it up. There's just no information. So I think it might be somewhat challenging, actually. Under the trade agenda, domestic manufacturing and reducing trade imbalances will be prioritized. This includes imposing a blanket 10% tariff on all imports and deprioritizing trade pacts. As a result, many of the country's largest trade partners may face potential economic risk given their dependence on US trade. So this is one of the big one. We've also got an article out. 9 states are suing the Biden admin at the moment to block voter registration executive order. Mississippi and 8 states sued the Biden admin, claiming that this is unlawful because it favors Democrats. This is called Executive Order 14019 on promoting access to voting of partisan infection so severe as to undermine its claimed intent, which is to make registering to vote and voting simple and easy. So they're saying that this is just going to help Democrats. It's not equally measured. And we've just had this come out as well, which is poverty rates by US state. And this has increased again dramatically for how many years, I don't know now. Poverty rate, even the lowest at 7.1% here, the highest at 18.2%. You can see it's the southern states that have the most poverty. Utah has the lowest amount of poverty here, but NM, so New Mexico, has the highest. It's quite staggering what is happening to the US with the wealth inequality, especially. It's pretty scary what's happening here and how fast this is accelerating. And we've got over over 100 LA residents could be homeless by the 2028 Olympics. If you thought this year was bad, the Paris Olympics, goodness me, wait until it comes to Los Angeles. I don't know how they're going to do it. 1 in every 115 inhabitants now is homeless in LA. 1 in every 150. And this is the forecast going forward. Right, it went from 69,000 to 84,000. By 2028, look at this, it's just going up 113,000. And you can see by all the articles, even millennials that earn $250,000, they just can't afford, anything, they're saying, where they live. But then again, they are living in Portland, Oregon. I probably suggest this family move. I don't know why they would want to live there, but okay. But no, this is it. You keep seeing these stories every day. People just can't afford, even on very large budgets now, can't afford to live in the US. And we're just seeing the cost of living index rising. And I was reading over because I was reading all the Trump's policies that he's talking about. I was reading some of Kamala Harris's policies. And I will say, there was a few things in there that I thought were very good for the economy. And then there was some things in there that I was going, oh, please no, why are you putting this in here? Highly socialist, on borderline communist policies, some of them, a lot of price controls on food and farming and a few things like this. It is a recipe for disaster. It really is with some of this. All right, well, that's you up to date. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless, and I'll see you next time.